Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today we will be interviewing James Corbett from the Corbett Report. James was removed from YouTube in 2020 based on his views of the situation that was happening at the time. And this highlights a lot of what content creators have to put up with. Right now, YouTube is going through many of the videos and demonetizing them. So it is important to support content creators like James and myself. If you want to see the uncensored version of this video, you can find it on Patreon, X subscriptions, or my ghost site, dmjr.ghost.io. They are all mirrors of each other. The only difference is there are different payment integrators. Check it out at patreon.com/fame21more or the other services I mentioned below. So I wanted to start off with just a brief introduction. Can you describe what you do for the audience?
Sure. My name is James Corbett. I'm at corbettreport.com, where I've been since 2007, and I produce podcasts, interviews, video, and articles on all manner of subjects, news and politics, as well as society, as well as philosophy, history, anything else that I'm feeling like. It's a wide variety of things that all roughly swirl around the ideas of power and how it operates in our society. So I guess you could think of me as, I don't think of myself as a journalist, at least not a gumshoe investigative reporter. I don't think of myself as a podcaster, although I suppose that is technically what I do. But I have recently hit upon the idea that I think fundamentally I'm an educator or a teacher. I try to synthesize and compile information on a lot of different things and present it in a way that hopefully teaches people about the world and how it operates so that they have a better map of reality that can guide them in the whatever they are attempting to do.
I really appreciate seeing just a wide array of topics. When I go to the Corbett Report, there's pretty much every topic you could think of, and you're just digging into it. There's previous episodes. So I wanted to, one of your latest videos, you were talking about AI being integrated into every aspect of our lives. So there's a trend of smart devices listening into everything. And I want to know your thoughts on just having everything as smart devices collecting data. Is it more of a privacy concern? And if the privacy concern was eliminated, do you think that the efficiency would be impactful enough to want to use smart devices?
Personally, no. Although I guess that is a decision that everyone can come to for themselves. I certainly wouldn't try to tell other people what they should or shouldn't be doing with their lives. But having said that, I would say that it probably is not in humanity's long-term best interest to continue relying on smart devices and outsourcing our cognitive labor to machines, because there will be the inevitable atrophy of our ability to think critically for ourselves. And I know some people who are very much wedded to this technology at this point seem to think that that is an overblown argument. Oh, it's the old slippery slope argument. I think it's already happening, and I see that from, for example, some of the feedback that I receive, even from my own audience, who one would suspect would be at least broadly sympathetic to my concerns about this technology. But on the contrary, I am receiving more and more feedback to the effect of people telling me about the conversation they just had with AI and how it has affirmed everything that they already believed. Surprise, surprise. Anyway, I suppose that's the long way around to answering the question. Smart technologies themselves obviously are surveillance and spying database devices. That's what they are. That is why they are implemented, have been implemented in the way that they did. That's why Amazon was happy to sell Alexa at a loss for so many years, because they wanted it in as many homes as possible, collecting as much data on you as possible to feed into the AI algorithms and their advertising algorithms. And oh, by the way, the backdoor to the police state that we know documentably exists in all of these systems. So asking to separate the technology from the privacy surveillance aspect of it is, I think, unrealistic. I don't think that will ever happen because that is the economic incentive upon which these technologies were created and foisted upon the public. But I suppose if we had some sort of magical universe in which, for some reason, somehow this technology spontaneously ended up in our laps without any connection to any deep state entities, without any snarfing up of our data for the benefit of people in remote locations who may do whatever they want with it, Uh, could it be a useful tool for people in their day-to-day lives? Potentially. But there is always the question of when the tools are merely useful tools for us to use versus when they become such integral aspects of our lives that the tool could arguably be said to be using us. And I think that is the long-term real danger of these types of technologies, which is a position that I laid out and described in some degree of detail in a documentary that I made recently on the media matrix, talking about the development of the history of mass media and media technologies and how we are starting to now integrate ourselves into those technologies, literally strapping on the VR goggles, and who knows what the next iteration of that type of technology will be. I think it is changing what it means to be human. And at the very least, I would suspect that it would be in their interests to understand and think about that before they start literally strapping themselves into this technology or inevitably implanting the brain chip in their heads.
So do you think that what is the end goal of a lot of the people that are pushing for these technologies and shoving them down our throats to try to evolve human beings?
I would imagine there are a number of players at the table, as it were, who are in there for their own reasons, and some of those reasons may vary. Some people may, I suppose, be motivated solely by the profit motivation. But having said that, I think the longer term goal for those who are seeking to consolidate power, the oligarchs who rule over our society, just as oligarchs have ruled over every human society throughout recorded human history, I would say that their motivation in the long run is, as it has always been, to perfect their control over the human cattle, which they are farming on their tax plantations. And to the extent that that can be accomplished, by creating a subservient class that will be essentially automatons who will eventually be replaced, I would assume, by the actual artificial intelligence servant, then yes, I think the long-term goal is essentially to eliminate what the original substrate Homo sapiens as they have existed. To a certain extent, I think you could already say that in some profound sense, we are a different species than we were even a century or two ago, in terms of our reliance on technological innovations, I suppose would be the neutral way to put that. But I think we are already stepping past that threshold of the Homo sapiens itself being already an extinct species.
We're witnessing a financial system being redesigned. A lot of the um, banks are updating to blockchain technology. Tokenization is becoming more and more relevant to everyday people. Lots of people are asking me about how to invest in crypto, right? And we're just seeing a lot of legislation pass trying to legalize stable coins. What is your view on the whole CBDC system and then stable coins?
Well, in fact, as we are speaking, I've just posted to my website a new conversation with Mark Goodwin, who is the co-author with Whitney Webb of a series of articles that I believe they are developing into a book that will be released later this year on the chain of consensus, talking about the development of not just blockchain technology as it pertains to Bitcoin or the cryptocurrencies, but also to stablecoin and the next iteration of the Ponzi scheme that is clearly being played out right now. And in that conversation, Goodwin makes the point, and I think quite effectively, that CBDCs are in fact even worse. Sorry, stable coins are even worse than CBDCs. So I will assume, I don't know what your audience is or is not familiar with, but of course, central bank digital currency, CBDC, is the idea of instruments of central bank liability that are directly issued by the central bank, and in the case of CBDC, in the form of a digital currency, which presumably the central bank would administer in some way. You would have some sort of wallet that would in some way interface with the central bank directly, and the central bank would be in a sense a steward over that wallet and would be able, for example, to program your money in any variety of ways. You cannot purchase so you cannot go on that vacation to Europe because you've already used your carbon allowance for the month, or imagine any other nightmare dystopian scenario. That would be possible, obviously, in a CBDC universe, and in fact, relatively trivial. So I think people, thankfully and rightfully, have at least in America and in other parts of the West, have started to wake up to the real impending danger of such a thing. For example, I think anyone in Canada who does not recognize the potential peril of tyranny that comes with control over one's financial instruments was not paying attention during the Freedom Convoy and what happened to those protesters who had their bank accounts literally frozen by the government. That was obviously a sign of what is to come and what will be so much easier in a CBDC administered economy. So, thankfully, for example, in the American political context, we've seen in the past couple of years a lot of politicians now not only mouthing the platitudes, but passing and the legislation, the anti-CBDC State Surveillance Act, and other such things, which are promising to prevent this nightmare dystopia from coming into reality. However, I think what people have not yet woken up to is the fact that the stablecoin iteration of this scam is going to be, if not as bad, potentially even worse than the CBDC scam, because the CBDC scam, at the very least, would be obvious on its face when the central bankers and those wielding the power at the central banks, through the financial intermediary institutions that are chosen by the central banks to administer such a system, freeze your account, place various restrictions on it. At least it would be obvious what was happening and from where. However, in the stablecoin economy, which is starting to develop and, of course, is being enabled by the Genius Act and other such legislation that's now coming into law, that economy will be essentially the same. Stablecoins will be as programmable in every way as CBDCs, with the added benefit of, instead of having a private quote unquote ledger with the central bank, now it will be an open ledger with some corporation that will be playing, of course, by U.S. governmental rules that are in implemented by Genius Act legislation and other such things, which means, of course, the SEC, the Treasury, the usual players will have the ability to lean on these corporations, Tether and others, in order to onboard the FBI, the Secret Service, whatever agencies they want, and will, of course, be able to eliminate people from those blockchains if and when they want to. But in this case, it will be like Operation Choke Point. For people who don't remember, that was an operation that was started under the Obama DOJ, in which the DOJ leaned on the FDIC to lean on the private banks to debank completely legal customers, legal businesses with legal bank accounts doing legal transactions because they didn't like those types of transactions. The ammo dealers and the same day money lenders and the porn stars and others, people that most people wouldn't step up to defend because who cares about them? And oh, by the way, they can, for example, use that exact same power to debank, say, political rivals, as we started to see in recent years. That is a nightmare scenario that was created not through the government. It wasn't the government doing it. It was the private banks that was doing this debanking at the behest of the government. In the same way, the stablecoin economy will presumably work in the same way. In this case, it's not the central bank directly controlling your account. It will be the Treasury leaning on the tethers of the world, whatever stablecoin that might be, to say, well, obviously, if you're going to be participating in this billions of dollars of our treasuries, well, you're going to have to play by our rules. And if you don't, well, then we're going to confiscate those treasuries holdings of yours, and they will be able to enact the same types of pressures. I think that is the danger that people are sleepwalking into because the CBDC threat, oh, don't worry, the politicians are taking care of that. They're not going to do CBDCs. But the stablecoin threat is at least equally as bad, and is already here and is already coming into view.
I've read a lot about law enforcement actually working with Tether right now, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people will argue that Tether is going to implode. They don't have all of the assets to back their liabilities, yada yada yada. But when I don't know about that, but if they're working with all these law enforcement agencies and you look back at some of the hacks and people were like immediately caught. It didn't take years or anything. It happened within like a couple of days or weeks even. So I think you're right on the money with that. Plus, I think stable coins are worse because the government writes out law and people could follow. People are going to be subjective with the law, right? They don't want to get too close to the line. So they're going to back up a few yards and they're not going to get to the line. And that's going to cause all of these, problems. And like you said, all of the sanctions that are coming about. So, yeah, it's eerie. And then on top of it, if we have this U.S. dollar denominated stable coin, there's certainly going to be spillover effects. I see Japan's bonds are imploding. I see Australia's bonds are imploding. I wanted to hear your thoughts on having, the U.S. dollar as the one world currency because of spillover effects.
Yes, in fact, that is another important aspect of the stablecoin regulatory regime that's now being hardwired into U.S. law. Why is Trump and other U.S. Politicians so interested in bolstering this stablecoin economy? It is because most of the stablecoins are, of course, tied to U.S. treasuries and or U.S. debt. Why are they interested in tying this new tokenization of money into this particular issuance of debt? It is because, of course, the debt can has been kicked down the road as far as it can be from the system that, of course, was set up at the end of World War II, the Bretton Woods system, U.S. dollar pegged $35 an ounce to gold. And obviously that they could not maintain that while creating the expanding social welfare and the expanding imperial warfare around the world in the 1960s. People started calling them on it. France even sent warships to Washington to start collecting their gold. So, of course, what did Nixon do in 71? He slammed the gold window shut. No more dollar peg to gold. So, what's backing up this dollar hegemony then? Well, of course, Nixon via Kissinger, really working on behalf of Rockefellers and others, engineered the petrodollar system. So, of of course, everyone needs oil. Every industrial economy on the planet needs oil. They will purchase that oil in dollars, and the Saudis, for example, have an additional part of that deal where they're going to launder all their money back through the U.S. banks themselves. So it creates a virtuous system in which the U.S. dollar essentially becomes the backbone of the world economy based on oil. As people may or may not have seen, that system is starting to, at the very least, falter, if not completely collapse. There is not only the rise of the petro yuan, but there are all sorts of indications, of course, that the U.S. dollar hegemony in the petrodollar realm is coming to an end. What will replace that? How will the U.S. continue not only to maintain, not only to continue to service its debt, but to actually continue expanding its whatever $35 trillion debt, whatever it is now, however many zeros they have managed to add in just the past few years? How will they continue to do that? Well, let's make, oh, I don't know, let's make everyone in the world dependent on U.S. treasuries. How do we do that? Oh, okay, well, they're going to buy into stable coins. It will be, if you're in Argentina, if you're in Timbuktu, if you're anywhere in the world and you want US dollars, well, here's the next best thing. You buy a stable coin, it's tied to the US dollar. And of course, what are they doing? They're buying treasuries to back up their reserves. So it continues to inflate the debt bubble. So the US dollar hegemony can continue. That is, I think, an essential part of the scheme that we're seeing right now. And it's only the scam is only even more ludicrous when you find, for example, that the very politicians who are doing this, like the Trump family, are literally invested in their own stablecoins, obviously to profit on this as they are cementing in U.S. hegemony for the future.
Yeah, the 80% tariffs when the market completely dipped. That's where we saw most of the accumulation happen from World Liberty Financial and some of the other entities. All right, so that's pretty interesting. Recently, Larry Fink was talking about private equity and making it more available to retirement accounts. And it's a $35 trillion market that's headed into something that's fairly illiquid, right? So, um, do you think that I have a theory that what the plan is to kind of like tokenize all these different assets, provide liquidity to things that traditionally don't have much liquidity, and then you have on-demand liquidity, and then you go into the illiquid assets with mass amounts of wealth, pushing up the asset prices, like we've seen with meme coins, like we've seen with Bitcoin and other altcoins, and now you have assets to match the liabilities, and it's pump and dump schemes at the expense of the American retirement. What are your thoughts about this?
Right. So a CDO, but entering into the private equity or something along those lines. Well, I think that's an aspect to it. My read on that would also involve essentially Larry Fink trying to do a John Bogle and trying to create a sort of an entire market for a different type of investment that in Bogle's case, famously, infamously, he ended up as a millionaire when he died, instead of the billionaire that he so obviously could have become, because he did not corner the market in the way that he could have done in inventing the index funds and the mutual fund industry as we know it. Larry Fink, I would imagine, would not be quite such a light touch, and I would imagine that, in fact, John Bogle's warning before he died that he thought that the increasing popularity of passive investing was going to create a situation in which a few corporations were essentially going to control all of the corporate voting power, which comes with, hey guys, you invest through us and we invest in everything, and oh by the way, we have all your voting power in these companies. And of course, that isn't the way that BlackRock operates, blah, blah, blah. There's 17 different debunks of that. But in reality, we know that obviously Larry Fink shareholder letter has great degree of sway over the markets generally, the public markets. Well, now he's attempting to do the same thing in the private equity markets. I don't know if he'll be successful at that, but it is certainly, as you say, I think it is an attempt at a different type of scam.